Welcome to Dr. Galmani Shimarao Junior College, subject Political Science, and the topic which we are going to discuss today is India and the World, Part 1, which includes Chapter 6. So, the first topic which we will discuss is India and the world, and what is India's place in the global politics. The first point we will discuss is that the objectives of foreign policy. So the first point is sovereign equality of states. Now what do we mean by sovereign equality of states? When we are talking about global independence, when we are talking about global place, it is very important for a nation to have its independent constitution. Therefore, and it should provide equality to all the states. Second point is non-intervention in the internal affairs of the state. One of the most important objectives of foreign policy is that it's non-intervention in the internal affairs of the state. Now, when we say internal affairs, a state is not expected to interfere in the internal matters of the other state unless and until it seeks for any help. The third point is the respect for international law. So when we say international law, we know that the international world order runs through an international law that is controlled by the International Court of Justice, and therefore it is the duty of every nation to respect that international law. The next objective is belief in peaceful coexistence and peaceful resistance. So when we say believe in peaceful coexistence and peaceful resistance, it means the peaceful and cordial relations with the other nations. Rather than going to war, it can solve its problem through mutual discussions and negotiations. The next is active participation in the regional organizations. Now, when we say regional organizations at the global level, we are indicating to the organizations like SAARC, ASEAN, G20, G Summit, BRICS. So these all organizations act as global regional organization, and it is the responsibility of the state to have an active participation in these organizations, because only then it will be known to the world, it can take steps to work towards the maintenance of international law and order. Now we move to objectives of India's foreign policy. So the first point we discussed is about the objectives of foreign policy. Now we are moving what are the objectives of India's foreign policy. So the first point is to maintain peace and security, which is mentioned in the directive principles of state policy. Now we know that the part 4 of our constitution includes the directive principles of state policy, which indicates the state to follow certain set of rules and policies which the state needs to follow in its administration. So the first policy is to maintain peace and security. No matter whatever strained relations we have with the other nation, it is the duty of the state to maintain peace and security, which is mentioned in the principles of state policy. The second important point is the protection of sovereignty and the integrity of the nation. So protection of the sovereignty, again, protection of the constitution and constitutional laws, and integrity of the nation, providing equality, protecting the principles of justice, secularism of our constitution. The next is, since 1990s, India had adopted the policy of national integration. This had been one of the most important objectives of foreign policy. This maintaining of national integration, we know that India is a diverse country, and it is a huge responsibility for the government to maintain unity among diversity and maintain the national integration. The next is Nehru's speech of September 1946 spelled out the features of India's foreign policy. So since our independence, our Prime Minister Nehru had been very liberal and very had looked forward to the principles of foreign policy and had been ready to adopt new policies to make the nation more developed in the arena of global politics. The next concept which we will discuss is about non-alignment. Now, what is non-alignment exactly? So, the concept itself means impartial. So, non-alignment has been an important aspect of India's foreign policy. Non-alignment literally means not to be part of any military alliance. It was response to the Cold War politics established by the two superpowers. Basically, this idea was adopted by India, and Pandit Nehru was the first architect to adopt this idea. And non-alignment literally means we know that the world was divided into two superpowers, that is USA and USSR, and India took an impartial stand, that is, it was not part of any of the military alliance. And this concept came to be known as non-alignment. The United States and Soviet Union attempted to extend their respective sphere of influence. So the United States and Soviet Union, we know that these were the superpowers, and they tried their best to extend their influence. That means they tried to capture more and more nations under its rim. The first NUM summit was held in Belgrade in 1961. So the first NUM summit was held in Belgrade in 1961. There were 18 NUM summits till date. The 18th summit was held in Baku, Azerbaijan. Up till date, we have 18 NUM summits already held, and the latest NUM summit was held in Baku, Azerbaijan, which was the 18th NUM summit. The next topic which we will discuss is the factors influencing the Indian foreign policy. Very, very important that what are the factors which is influencing the Indian foreign policy? The first is geography. So its vast coastline on the south and the presence of Himalayan mountain range to the north and the northeast has shaped India's attitude towards foreign and security policy. The unique geography of South Asia, while all neighboring countries share a border with India, none a border with each other shapes the foreign policy too. So when we say geography, India's geography is surrounded by diversity. We have the Himalayan ranges in the north, to the India, again to the south, we have the Kanyakumari and the neighboring states, including Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, all the diverse countries we have. Therefore, geography, how India has maintained itself, how India has maintained its cordial relation with all the neighboring nations in geographical terms, that becomes an important factor in determining the foreign policy. Second is history. This includes India's traditional cultural values such as peace and coexistence. It also includes the influence of cultural ties. Some of the basic values like anti-colonialism, anti-racialism were laid during the freedom struggle. So when we say history, basically it indicates historical similarity. There were many countries, many Asian countries, many African countries which shared the same history as India. As India was colonized, they were also colonized. So the traditional cultural values such as peace and coexistence and some values like anti-colonialism, anti-racialism were laid during the freedom struggle. So this way history becomes an important factor in determining the foreign policy of India. The next is economy. There was a strong urge to come out of poverty and backwardness that had emerged from the colonial period. The policy of import substitution and giving importance to public sector enterprise had a tremendous impact on India's foreign policy. Very, very important point. We know that economic factor. Economy is a major determinant of foreign policy. It indicates a country's position in the global world. So there was a strong urge to come out of poverty and backwardness that had emerged from the colonial period. Since we were colonized, we were under the rim of poverty, backwardness, underdevelopment. So the basic challenge was how to come out from this problem. So therefore, the policy of import substitution and giving importance to public sector enterprise had a tremendous impact of India's foreign policy. Many fundamental changes have occurred in foreign policy of India after adopting the policy of liberalization, privatization, and the globalization in the post-1991 era. So we know that the 1991 era played a significant role in the economic history of India because in 1991, the policy of liberalization and privatization were adopted to liberalize the economy, and to a large extent, it had been able to free India economy and make it more broad and had helped India to interconnect at the global level. The next important factor is polity. Now, when we say polity, it basically means the form of government which the country has and how that form of government is helping that country to maintain the foreign relations or to maintain the foreign policy. So the executive organ of the government plays an important role in making and implementing the foreign policy of India. Leadership has an important and significant influence on the foreign policy of a nation. So when we're talking about the executive organ, we mean the main organ, the governmental organization, the steps they are taking, what steps they are taking to maintain the foreign policy. See, it all depends on them. What policies they are making, what schemes they are making in order to make the country's economy, in order to make the country's place worldwide. Then leadership. When we say leadership, we mean the person ruling the nation. We know the ruling party has one leader ruling the nation. Therefore, it is more or less it is in the leader's hands to take important significant decisions of foreign policy. The Ministry of External Affairs plays a pivotal role in drafting the foreign policy and giving advice to the political executive. So here, the political executive are the members of the parliament, and as a separate committee, we have the Ministry of External Affairs, which looks after the top topics of foreign policy, which looks after the issues of foreign policy, so that this department has the responsibility of handling the issues of foreign matters. So in this way, the form of government plays an important role in determining the foreign policy. The next is international system. During the Cold War, the bipolar system and superpower politics had impacted the foreign policy of India. The regional system has also made an impact on India's foreign policy. The Indo-US dialogue, the China-Pakistan dialogue have improved India's foreign policy since 1990. Now, international system, we mean what kind of system, what kind of relations India had with other nations. So during the Cold War, the bipolar world and superpower politics has impacted the foreign policy of India. Superpower politics, we may say the two superpowers, that is USA and USSR. And the regional system has also made an impact on India's foreign policy. The regional system here implies the forming of regional organizations. So those organizations, those Southeast Asian organizations, those South Asian organizations, or any kind of European nations organizations had a major impact on India's foreign policy. Also, the Indo-US dialogue, that is, India had a dialogue with US regarding for economic and political terms, and the China-Pakistan dialogue to improve India's relation with China had played an important role in determining the international system. So, in determining the international system, that means what kind of role India needs to play, what kind of step India needs to take to make itself better in performing the role in international system. That's all we have to discuss. We will discuss in our next slide regarding part 2.